Hi.
This is Lani Kass, and you're watching the Break It Down show. Say that. That's what you're supposed to say. You say, hi, this is Lani Kass, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Oh, hi, I'm Lani Kass. You're watching Breaking It Down.
That's right, the Break It Down. Yeah. That's right. Hey, so we've been trying to work on this for a while. You're busy, I'm busy, schedules and everything else, but I'm super happy to have you back on the show. We first did this when the Ukraine conflict started, and we were trying to explain how, a lot of people in our foreign policy, in the Department of Defense, these big places, they have degrees in how we're going to fight Russia, how we're going to fight China. And a lot of this stuff becomes self-fulfilling prophecies, even if it doesn't make sense for us to, insert ourselves. And here's an interesting thing. I was having this conversation the other day with James Rosebush. We'll get mad at Iran for having a proxy war with someone that we like, but we can have whatever proxy war we like. No one's allowed to get mad.
The advantages of being a superpower, we're allowed to do things that others are not allowed to do, and God help you if you point that out.
Yeah. Same thing with elections. We can interfere. We can say, in Afghanistan, we want Karzai to be elected, but and then work to make that happen. But if someone does that to us, we don't like that.
Well, Ukraine being the prime example. I mean, arguably, the United States orchestrated the coup.
Yeah.
And very politely said on an open mic, F the EU, when somebody pointed out, well, the EU would not particularly like that. And one Victoria Nuland, not realizing it's an open mic, said F the EU.
Yeah.
And there we are.
Yeah. So when you look at our foreign policy, and I want to think vertically here, right? Because if you're at the very top advising the joint chiefs or whoever it is that you're, and I'm all the way at the bottom on the ground trying to see if this stuff is working, I can tell you that none of it connects, right? So if we pick a foreign policy that will work, and that is not a given, and I would say it's actually, we don't ever worry about if it's working or not. It doesn't connect to the actual skills and the people on the ground and what they're capable of accomplishing,
Well, that is true and inevitable. I mean, by the time that, and it's true in any area, not just foreign policy, domestic policy, even in business, when you go from a high-level vision, assuming there is one, and you translate it down the line to facts on the ground, a lot gets lost in the middle, to include the original vision. And it's inevitable, and you see it in every area of life. I mean, I remember on numerous occasions when I worked on the joint staff for the chairman, when you went on the ground in Afghanistan or Iraq or name the place, and you would question something, that you saw on the ground, the answer would be, well, we're just implementing policy X. And you go, well, wait a second, policy X does not translate into that. But, when we were kids, remember when we played this game that you repeat something in a circle? I whisper in your ear and somebody repeats it to the person next to them. And by the time it comes around, it's completely garbled. It's completely different. So it's not malice. Some of it is when you dress up a policy in nice sound bites.
Right.
They don't very often translate easily into actions on the ground.
That is
You
true.
know, I mean, the example I have always used, World War II, right before the Normandy landings. The mission was very clear, right? Get your ass on the continent of Europe and don't stop until Germany surrenders. That's pretty clear. Okay, there
Yeah,
are
yeah.
not too many nuances in that.
No.
Show me a single policy since World War II that is as clear and executable as this one. And every time somebody is interviewed, somebody in possession of authority is interviewed, their statement becomes the new policy. So,
Right.
the difference between planning and execution is huge.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about just in this one spot right here. But one of the things I realized, so I was in Afghanistan and I'd become excellent at working on the field level. And our commander was like, "Hey, I want you guys to start speaking higher. I want you to go to some of these conferences." For people who didn't know, we had conferences in theater so we could get better. And he said, "I want you guys to go talk about information operations
Right.
and go to this conference." And so we said, "Okay, great." So we were recommended by a ground commander in a hard place to go speak, and we got uninvited.
Why?
And who knows? Because we hadn't done anything wrong. We just were not known. Why were we not known? Because we're at the ground level working every day. And so here is the machine, doesn't like bad news, doesn't want to hear from people it doesn't know. And so
Right.
when I'm being vulgar, I say different things, but it self-congratulates itself on success. Meanwhile, I'm looking at a government at the ground level where it matters the most. It's not in any way connected to the people. And Lani, I know you'll get this, but when I say to someone who ought to know better, you understand that the government, this is the government that we had helped set up, the government of Afghanistan does not connect directly to its local governor. That person is picked by the person who runs
Right.
Afghanistan. So it is not a direct democracy. And that creates a problem. And people would look at me like I was crazy and say, "No, they vote for their leader." And I'm like, "No, they do not." And that matters.
No. And, that actually surprises me because in Afghanistan, we actually knew very well that the power of the official government in Kabul didn't extend beyond the Kabul Beltway, and there was no Beltway in Kabul. So really, and you're raising a really important point. You kind of glossed it over, but it's really an important point. There is the expectation of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Yeah.
there is the expectation that because I said it, so shall it be written, so shall it be done, to quote an old Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
But it's not. So you have a confirmation bias because I meant well. I came up with a great policy. It should work. So now I'm seeing signs of it working. And I am wanting to hear from people that will confirm my bias that my very well-intentioned policy actually worked. If I have a second, I will give you an example how to overcome it. And
Please.
it's exceedingly rare. So Admiral Mullen, the chairman for whom I worked for 4 years, everywhere he went, he would meet exclusively with junior officers and enlisted and kick out all the commanders out of the room. And it was just him. His staff, meaning us, weren't allowed to be in. So imagine you have the senior most officer in the nation talking to the most junior people on the ground, unimpeded by the need to be nice.
Yeah.
And he encountered a lot of criticism because the commanders didn't like it. Both the officers and the enlisted were like, he needs to be talking to us. But he got ground truth from people who were executing the mission on a daily basis. I don't know of anybody else before or since who has done that. But that is literally the only way you are going to get beyond the handshake and patting on the back. And this is the best policy since sliced bread.
Yeah. It's tough. And even that, I would push back because that's what we're supposed to do here and say, I don't know that if you have Admiral Mullen show up, that room is in any way representative of people being able to be honest. If they have knowledge, like the knowledge required, I mean, I know Dan Bolger, General Dan Bolger, had done the same kind of thing. He would go on patrols, but even then, can they hear what I'm saying? So let me I'll give you an example. So we had a general come out to Zabul province, which is, for the audience, it's South Central.
I know Zabul province very well.
And so this general comes out and he's like, you see this bazaar, we're going to invest money in it and we're going to get it going again. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Yes, that's the briefing, but that's not possible here because the Taliban decides who gets a franchise and who doesn't. And that bazaar is shut down for a reason. And so when he comes out and says that, not only is he irrelevant to all the Afghans, he's irrelevant to everybody who's been there going, we're trying to get a shop set up. And it was impossible to do because the Taliban had too much control of the region. And so even when you have that honesty, you have to have people who can speak clearly and have influence, And I'm not saying Admiral Mullen didn't do a good job, but it's very, very hard to have the ability to communicate.
But you see what he did not allow the commanders to select who is going to be at that meeting. He never announced when that meeting is going to take place.
Right.
So, it was like a snap inspection, so to the extent that you can get ground truth, that was about as close to ground truth as one can get.
Let's go back up and let's now go back to the big if. If you pick the right policy, I'll use rule of law. We always say, hey, let's get rule of law out there. Then Pete would go out and be like, hey, they have rule of law here. They
have their own
murders like over people, right? And so they have rule of law. We just don't like it. It's not our rule of law.
It's not our rule of law. So
here's the next problem. Let me say one more thing, and then I'm gonna let you talk in a sec. Let me just say this next part. We'll build a rule of law system and say, here's a crime lab. Here's some incredible training for your police officers to do all these things. And then everybody's totally fine if there's zero convictions in this system, and we look and we blame the Afghans or the Iraqis and say, how come you're not using this rule of law system that's built for you? And we're okay with years and years of no convictions, no court cases, the judge going, hey, so I wanted to say that so that people understand that when we say rule of law, there's a lot of complex parts to this.
Well, when we say rule of law, we mean ours, right? I mean, arguably, the Quran provides a rule of law,
Exactly.
You steal, I chop your hand, right? You have an affair, I'll stone you to death.
Right.
I mean, that's a rule of law. It's just one we don't like. The Hammurabi rule of law was also a rule of law, the first
Right.
one on the planet. When we talk about a rule of law, we mean our system. And it's not always applicable. And, we were talking about things getting lost in translation when you talk among yourselves, really. Imagine that being literally lost in translation when you talk to somebody speaking another language and another culture. And again, not to get into war stories here, but very, very often when I traveled, either with the chairman or with the Air Force chief, I took over translation duties because the translations were atrocious. So you had interpreters who translated words rather than concepts. And what you got is a meaningless salad. Now, in languages that I did not speak, what always struck me, especially in Northeast Asia with the Chinese or with the Koreans, the principal would talk, say, like a 4-minute statement, and the interpreter would say a very short sentence in about 15 seconds as the translation. And you go, that can't possibly be. So what are you missing? And you conducting a dialogue. Imagine that you understood half of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you respond to that, and nuances get lost. I mean, we can do a whole show on arms control and critical nuances being lost in translation.
Yes. Yeah. And let me make it a little bit worse. We have no, at least in the Department of Defense, no definitive state-of-the-art training on how to work with an interpreter, how to develop an interpreter, how to validate. We don't have that. And so we just work with
You can't, because who is going to validate? So, you would need a native speaker of both languages. And that's difficult right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we stopped emphasizing foreign languages, and that's a tragedy. Right after 9/11, I testified to Congress, and one of the members of the Armed Services Committee, of the House Armed Services Committee, asked me, what is the most important thing Congress can finance right now? And this was like November after September 11. So we were already fighting in Afghanistan. Iraq wasn't on anybody's scope at that time. And I said, reinstate the National Defense Act. And the congressman said, what's that? And I explained this is something Congress legislated after the Sputnik. So we're talking 1957, which gave a scholarship to anyone who was ready to study Russian, East European, Warsaw Pact, language, culture, linguistics. You got a full ride. I'm a beneficiary of that. My husband is a beneficiary of that.
Right.
Reinstate that for Arabic, Pashto, and Persian. Well, that did not happen.
No?
No. No. And again, those are languages I do not speak. But every time I visited, it was so clear that things are getting lost in the translation.
Right.
So, when you're going back to the role of law, you're trying to explain now at the conceptual level. My husband, again, I'm telling war stories today. This is typical United States Army wisdom. So he had neonative fluency in Russian. This is the height of the Cold War.
Right.
So the United States Army, in its infinite wisdom, sent him to Vietnamese language school and taught him Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And, when you teach languages in the military, you teach phrases. So he could say, Lieutenant, there is a white phosphorus grenade under your white fender. But
Right.
there was something not white phosphorus and under your white fender, she didn't know how to say that.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah.
And we do that in all
It's
the
true.
languages. That's how we
Yeah.
teach.
Yeah. It's true. And then we say that you have language capacity. We don't take it seriously. That's the bottom line, right? And so I can deploy with my language training and it's not even 40 hours. And I've learned things like stop or I'll shoot, or this is the customs checkpoint. And I'm like, I don't work in that center. So you're 100% right. I'm big on trying to figure out how to make people better at working with. I'm more on the let's make people universal so they can work with any interpreter. But I agree, you should have some secondary language capacity. Let's back up and go to the top again.
Sure.
We pick these things. So we said rule of law, but we also, I always say, like, things that brief well, right? It briefs well to say we are going to empower females. The problem is who's qualified to do this? So I'm going to talk about Benedicte Grima she's specialized in Pashtunistan. And she went out and did ethnographies for years and really got great at it. And I had her on the show and I said, at what point can someone inculcate enough and understand the culture enough to actually engage safely females? And she said, never. You can never do it. So this is an expert who's like saying, you do not ever do that. Now, she could say, yeah, you're ready or not ready. And she's not willing to do that. But the military, State Department, they'll be like, yeah, just, and I literally have seen this. The sergeant major said, Miller is a female, she can do it. And that is not, so the foreign policy to empower people in a place that stones people to death, you can't start there. You can't begin. You have to begin with, can we make the economy work? Can we get the government to function? And then expand out from there years down the road. But we are so desperate, Lani, we are so desperate to talk about and brief what we've done for women or homosexuals or anything else, that we lose sight of the fact that is inappropriate. You're going to get people killed. And that is exactly what happens.
Well, I'm smoking because, those are American concepts that you try to bring into a culture that totally, absolutely does not accept them. And, they're not vertical because that's what they're supposed to do. Right. But, at the end of the meeting, they'll take the 7-year-old boy and abuse him. And that happened on our installations, in full view of us, and the answer when you raise that would be, well, that's part of their culture. Well, a part of their culture is also to stone people to death. So, which part of the culture do you accept, which is more abhorrent to you? To me, there is nothing more abhorrent than abusing children.
Right.
Which is rampant in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we pick this foreign policy and we put people who are completely unprepared to handle the culture, to handle the work, to safely go into a village. And look, here's the thing is we'll go one time and we'll set out a briefing. I talk to women about having a period, and that'll be the briefing, and then we'll never go back there. And then somewhere will be like, we've taught 50 million people how to have a period. You know, and it's like, no, you
No.
haven't. You've caused chaos in the villages,
Right.
and that
And people
yeah.
are really snickering behind your back.
Oh my gosh!
And you
Of
can
course,
see that. You
yeah,
can see that. Again, I don't want to take up the show with stories, but
yeah,
I can tell you 1,000 of those because our interlocutor, be it in Afghanistan or in Russia or in China,
right,
knows exactly our biases, and they use our words, to echo us. And we are really happy about that,
oh
but
yeah.
there is nothing genuine behind it. How
Mm.
are we doing on time? Can I tell a really quick
We got
story?
all the time you need. Please do
Okay,
it. Go
so
crazy.
this is just a great story. So we're negotiating the new START agreement in Geneva with the Russians. And the chairman is representing the United States with a very strict script from the Obama administration. And I took over translating from Russian into English because I got tired of the mistranslations. And
Right,
the KGB interpreters were very happy, but they also knew that I'm completely based on what they mistranslating.
right.
And the Russian chief of defense, General Makarov, he is gone now, so I can mention his name, kept referring to transparency, and I translated it as transparency, because that's the only way you can translate it.
Right.
That evening, there is a huge reception at the Russian embassy. And General Makarov and Admiral Molin are talking about fishing. And I am the only one interpreting for the two of them. So now I'm doing Russian, English, English, Russian. And English to Russian is harder for a non-native speaker. And I told Admiral Mullen right away, okay, you're talking fishing. I am out of my depth, so to speak.
Right.
So I'm just going to say fish because I don't know the various species, in English or in Russian.
And it matters. Right.
And Admiral Makarov is talking about a fish in Lake Baikal, which is where he is from, which is completely translucent to the point that when you look at the fish, you can see the nerves firing and the digestive system working, and it all of a sudden occurs to me that he is using a very different word than transparentnost, the cognate from English.
Right.
And I said to him in Russian, why are you using a different word? Russian is such a rich language. Why are you using an American cognate
Right.
for transparency when you have 5 different words in Russian, synonyms, to define something that is translucent, that you can completely see what's happening?
Yeah.
And he says, well, Lani, you're such a smart girl. Tell your boss that if he comes fishing with me in Lake Baikal, I will make the arms control translucent, not transparent. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
So, of course, after that, I Googled, there is no such fish in Lake Baikal or anywhere in the world. He was sending a message.
Right.
And the message was, I'm going to use a word that you're familiar with because that's what you expect. That doesn't mean that you're going to get complete transparency.
Yeah.
However, if the relationship develops, we can have genuine transparency.
Yeah. It's important because we get these performative events, where we go out and we say we are here to
Right.
do mobile democracy and we'll bring the governor out to you. The governor doesn't want to do that. The people aren't expecting it, and so we'll brief that we've done this thing, and then you go out and you're like, isn't this great? You've met your governor today. They'll be like, oh
Yeah.
yes, this is the best. This is, oh man, that
Sure,
guy,
we
Yeah.
have full transparency in inspections. I mean, this sounds great. You drop the cable back to Washington saying the Russians agreed to full transparency. And you're not gilding the lily. That's exactly what they said. Right? Until you have somebody who understands the culture, gets into a conversation about fishing, and discovers that there is a hidden message here, which until that conversation, the reason I'm saying that is by that time we had trust, we had time, and it was contingent on more trust and more time, something that never took place. So,
boy, you are saying things that make me.
yeah.
When I realized that I had to have zero ego and I had to work as small and as delicately and deliberately as possible. And the second I thought I had something right, I had to go back and double check it. And trust takes enormous amounts of time to have. And then there's an exchange. This is just what I've developed. I have the trust bank, so I've got to extend credit, and it's low level, low risk trust at first. And then you slowly graduate up to like higher level trust and higher risk, to where I can, and I'm not condoning anybody else do this, but I could go to an Afghan elder and he could say, if you come to my house, we can talk more openly. And I'm like, well, I can't come to your house because I got to be protected. And he goes, I will protect you. Now, this is not the first meeting, right? I will protect you and you will be safe. I guarantee it. Now I can go there because we've got high level high level trust exchange. And then he really can take his guard down and he really can talk to me. And I can ask those questions and say, you guys are saying you're into female empowerment. What does that look like for you? For real? And they'd be like, that's not going to happen. Here's why. And they'll explain all this stuff, right? Yeah. But that trust is vital. And until you hear, this is how I test for it. Until you hear your words coming out of their mouth, whether it's Admiral Mullen or Sheikh Bob over here in Iraq, until they're saying the words that you've said and they're buying into some of these concepts, you don't have the right kind of trust to ask for anything.
Well, based on the story that I told, I mean, it is at the highest level of trust because you're talking about nuclear arms control between the two countries that can destroy the planet. And he's repeating your terminology, transparency. And you're saying, okay, they agreed to transparency.
Right.
And I'll admit, I was naive enough that evening and also had enough vodka that actually thought there is a fish like that.
Right.
And he's just using an analogy. It wasn't till later that I discovered he was using a
Yeah.
story, a
A
parable.
store. Yeah. Well, and that's you've recognized as well as I have that the first rule of stability operations or foreign policy is that you have to make mistakes. And if you
Yes.
don't make mistakes, you're making the very next mistake. Like you have to be like, I didn't realize this. And that's why it's got to be deliberate. So I really enjoy talking to you about these things because we miss this stuff. And one of the things I'm trying to do is to get us better at this, to pick better foreign policy, to remove our own ideology out as much as
That's
possible.
impossible. I mean, seriously,
I know.
it's impossible. It's like a person says, I'm not biased. Well, that's BS. Everybody is biased.
Yeah.
What you want is people who at least are aware of their biases.
Right.
Because the moment you hear a person saying, I have no biases, I have no dog in this fight, the next thing that you hear is BS.
Yeah. No, that's true. It's a tell. So one of the things I've been working on with Ukraine is trying to figure out so one thing, an ideology we have here in the US, similar to like, hey, let's lead with female empowerment, is we like small startup businesses, micro loans, these kind of things. If you have established people who are like, I am a successful businessman 25 times over, I run a worldwide empire, you don't know it because you're from America, but I'm here in Ukraine and I can turn dirt into energy, into fertilizer, into titanium. So I can do all of these things. And we go, oh, you're an oligarch. And you're like, well, hold on. This person can put thousands, 100,000 people to work. And we just start with you're an oligarch? No, like that doesn't. You completely kneecap and I'm not condoning bad behavior, but what I am saying is if you have people who are great at business, and every nation has these people, why do we ostracize these people? Why do we every person not every person, I met a lot of people in Iraq who were like, I have a degree from the London School of Economics, an advanced degree, and I am pushing a broom. And I'm like, why is that? So when we look at that, Lani, how do we improve the accuracy of our foreign policy? How do we, and I know you're going to have stories about this, how do we pick better people? When we pick Tymoshenko to go out and do things, and then she's out making deals with Putin, we're like, oh no. And so we go backwards because we fall in love with the pretty girl that speaks English and has the very beautiful hair. So how do we get better at picking people who can be the leaders, whether it's in business or in religion or in politics? How do we get better at picking those people?
You're not going to like my answer, but my answer.
Oh, come on.
We should not be picking people because you're going to pick people who are just like you, who speak English, who are educated in the United States, who are smart enough to give you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And, we fail every time we do that. That's the reason I say we should never be in the business of regime change.
Yeah.
Because you can't from a distance pick the right people. I mean, you have an example unfolding in horrific detail, and it's not the United States, it's Israel in this case, which is right there, speaks the language, understands the culture. Israel sponsored Hamas back in the 60s as a religious charitable alternative to the PLO, which was supported by the KGB. Okay? Here is an Islamic religious organization. They're not crazy communists. They're not trying to uproot the system. And all they want to do is charity. That's a good thing. We're going to support that.
Yeah.
And look what happened. And this is, a next door neighbor. Will you understand the language, the culture, the drivers of decision making, and you raised a monster? Kind of like we did supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. But you can argue, okay, we didn't understand the culture. We didn't know the language. Israel can't make this argument.
Right.
And Hamas evolved to be orders of magnitude more militant than the PLO. And now you're seeing in living color, what happened when they got control over a strip of land, which could have been Singapore when Israel pulled out in 2005. Gaza could have been Singapore. Great real estate, terrific location, good relationship at the time between the Palestinian Authority in charge. I was actually in Gaza in 2004, and there was a joint police station with a Palestinian flag and an Israeli flag. There were joint patrols on jeeps leaving from that police station, one Arab, one Israeli policeman. The United States was supporting that. Gaza literally could have been Singapore. So what happened? Hamas runs for election, gets democratically elected, kills everybody from the Palestinian Authority, one man, one vote, one time, 2006, and you have constant war since.
Right. It's this stuff is hard also. Let's make sure to say that.
And as I said, here is a country that truly understands the enemy.
Yeah.
It's not, thousands of miles overseas. It's across the fence.
Right. Yeah, it's right there. Let's go back to Ukraine because so I'm pretty critical of the Atlantic Council. When they and I don't, maybe you're for them, but here's why I'm critical.
I'm not.
When they take money from Akhmatov or Pinchuk, because again, we like these guys. Pinchuk goes out and he buys our high-end modern art. He's tied to the Clinton Foundation.
Did you see the yacht that Zelensky bought?
Oh yeah, come on. Yeah, and so certain oligarchs we don't like Firtash, we don't like Kolomoisky, we don't like anybody. There's all kinds of people we do and don't like, but a lot of that's just us just picking a foreign policy lane, and anybody on the left of it. And these folks don't know because they're not from here, right? These are old Soviets. Anybody on this side is for Russia, and anybody on this side is for America. It's never that simple.
No,
it's never that simple.
It's not. It's not. And, culturally, again, the United States remains a Puritan culture.
Right.
As much as we like luxury and big houses and nice cars, the United States remains a Puritan culture. In Eastern Europe, because, they've never overcome the post-World War II scarcity, having a yacht or having a dacha, a mansion, is a status symbol, and you expected to have that. Having a designer olive drab T-shirt that Zelensky is wearing, it's a status symbol, and it's a culture that we don't understand. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and corruption is endemic worldwide. Plenty of
Right.
corruption in Washington.
Oh yeah.
We want to point fingers at other countries, but you have plenty of corruption everywhere in the world.
So what do? How do we like I go back to the Atlantic Council. You have all these folks that have worked for the State Department. They slide over to the Atlantic Council. They write these papers, and we believe them like they've done well. But you
I
look at the
don't.
history, and you're like, I'm just saying, a lot of people do, and so they write these things, and then you go, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Like, we've lost all of our recent conflicts. We've created a mess in the Middle East.
Right.
Shut up, Atlantic Council. It's like, stop. So look, they're not 100% bad, but there's such a problem where these folks, generals, whoever it is, you guys lost. You got it wrong. You didn't set us up right. You picked the wrong people. You picked the wrong things. So quit telling us that we're going to run the same playbook, because we're going to look. As well as I do, we're going to go to Ukraine and we're going to say, you farmers need to learn how to farm, and we're going to, because we've done that throughout our entire history. And we're going to go to Israel and do the same thing. Oh, yeah. No, come on. So when we look at Ukraine, and there's reconstruction coming, and we look at Israel/Palestine, are we in any way going to get this right? Should we be involved? What are your thoughts?
Which one? Ukraine or
you pick?
Israel?
You pick.
Start with Ukraine. Well, we are involved. I mean, it is a proxy war. Whatever you think of Putin, when he says, I'm fighting NATO, he is.
He is.
I mean, we are there except in name. So there are no officially forces on the ground, but US equipment is, US support is, US advice, US intelligence, etc., etc. So, in all the years that we negotiated with the Russians always said to us, even though historically that wasn't exactly true, we have never killed each other. Historically, that's not exactly true, because the United States intervened on the side of the white forces after the October Revolution, and in Vietnam and Korea, the Russians participated in combat, even though they kept it secret for a long time. In Ukraine, there is no getting out of it. We are there. Yeah, we will participate in the reconstruction. It's going to be a Marshall Plan. It's going to be huge. And a lot of people are going to get incredibly rich, because there is going to be a lot of corruption. So, I mean, I can write you that script in a nanosecond. Not any different than any reconstruction effort, Afghanistan, Iraq, you name it, except this one is in the heart of Europe. And China is going to come in, and they're going to underbid us, and they're going to get filthy rich and gain influence. Again, script that is very easy to write. In the Middle East, I think that's pretty binary. The United States has to support Israel. I mean, you can't support Hamas. I mean, you can't. And, I love the differentiation between, there is Hamas and there is the innocent Palestinians. Bill Zayt University, which is a university in the West Bank, one of the best Palestinian universities, conducted a public opinion poll in, I believe it was either November 17 or 19. So very, very recent. 82% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza support the October 7 massacre. 78 support Hamas. You would say, that's interesting. How does that work? Well, that's because the rest support the even more militant organizations like Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So if you add it up, you are in an 88% range.
Yeah.
There is a reason President Abbas, Palestinian Authority president, did not conduct elections since 2005. He knows he's not going to get elected. So the notion, that we need to differentiate, like there was Al-Qaeda and then there were the innocent people. And in Afghanistan, you actually definitely had it. The average Afghani didn't even know what Al-Qaeda was.
Right.
That is definitely not the case in Israel-Gaza conflict. The ceasefire has been extended to more hostages I saw were released. I think the Israeli objective is exactly the same objective the United States had after 9/11. Dismantle Al-Qaeda, make sure an attack like that never happens again. Full stop. I, for one, don't think the United States should even advise Israel how to do that. One reason being, we tried our way for 20 years, and how did that work out for us?
Yeah.
We
couldn't even keep him in the room. The Palestinians wouldn't even stay in the room. They would leave, right? Yeah.
To me, though, the fundamental difference is Israel already left Gaza. In 2005, that's how many years ago? You do the math.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost 20 years ago. What else can you do, to make them feel better? They want to establish a state? Go ahead, establish a state. I mean, Israel is not an occupying power in Gaza. It has zero international responsibility. Not the case in the West Bank, where Israel is the occupying power. But in Gaza, and the two are separated by Israel at its widest point. People rarely look at the maps.
That's true too.
When you say from the river to the sea, well, that means annihilation of Israel, because that's what's in the middle. So if you look at the map of Israel at its narrowest point, it's about 6-7 miles, which is the width of the Gaza Strip. At its widest point, where it comes to the middle of Gaza and goes to the Dead Sea, you're talking about 30 miles. So, but it's next door. I mean, the atrocities happened. And that's another thing that most Americans don't understand. The atrocities happened within Israel's internationally recognized borders. People talk about settlements. Those aren't settlements. Those are villages, towns within the Green Line, within Israel's internationally recognized borders.
Yeah.
So you had an infiltration from an area that Israel left almost 20 years ago. into Israel proper, and unprecedented slaughter and atrocities. There is no middle ground here.
Yeah.
You know, I was at the Pentagon on 9/11, and the bloodlust that everybody felt, you know, I mean, because the most cherished value of nobody gets to attack my homeland got shattered that day.
Yeah.
You know, and people were talking about, you know, using the ultimate weapon. Here, this happens not from a distance, not, you know, by airplanes flying into buildings. These are people going and deliberately, brutally executing men, women, and children. That, to me, there is like no middle ground, none whatsoever. And honestly, I am appalled by the number of pro-Palestinian demonstrations on college campuses, on the streets, in the United States, in Europe. You know, the people who demonstrate don't understand that people with their views, we were talking about gays, for example, would be immediately killed in those countries. I mean,
you could convert and they would kill you. Like, you've been converted. Great. And now you're dead.
Right.
That's the kind of people we're talking about.
Actually, you would not offer conversion to somebody who is gay.
Right. Well, there's that too. Yeah.
In Islam, you know, the Islamic just war tradition, and actually there is one, requires you to offer conversion. It's called conversion at the point of the sword, which is why the Saudi flag and the ISIS flag has the Shahida from the Quran and a sword.
That's right.
So if you are taken prisoner or abducted or surrender on the battlefield, the obligation is to offer you to accept Islam. If you do, your life will be spared. If you don't, you'll get killed. But if you are someone who engages in bestiality, homosexual relations, or anything like that, that option is not available to you.
I want to back out.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we covered that, but we also have this problem of people like Yahya Sinwar, who is a leader in Hamas, or the religious leader of Iran, the president of Iran. These other going openly on social media, and this is just a quote here from Mr. Sinwar. He says, the leaders of the occupation should know October 7th was just a rehearsal. And so to that, Israel says, we believe you. We're going to continue to prosecute this fight. And then I know you know this, and I keep saying this because people don't realize Israel is not going to stop, and they're not going to be bound by borders. They went into South America, into a sovereign country, and they pulled out Eichmann, and they took him to Israel, not The Hague, or and they took him there, and they executed him after a trial. They will put a phone bomb into next to someone's head if they're Hamas. If they're in Qatar in a fancy hotel, they're going to go kill those people. They're not going to.
Without a shadow of a doubt. When the full-scale military operation in Gaza ends, I absolutely guarantee you. You remember Operation Wrath of God after the massacre in the Munich Olympics, when Golda Meir told Mossad, send in the boys. And within 2 years, everyone who was in any way associated with the massacre of the Israeli athletes met his 72 virgins, or at least the meeting was arranged.
Yeah. They're
So
not going to stop.
there is not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that that is going to happen. And again, the declared objective of the operation is not any different than Operation Enduring Freedom.
That's right.
Destroy Al-Qaeda so that 9/11 cannot ever happen again. I mean, of all the objectives that I have seen in my career for a wide variety of military operations, that was the closest to the one given to Eisenhower: get your ass on the continent of Europe and don't stop till Germans surrender.
That's right.
So that's my view on that one.
Do you want to cover Ukraine at all, or do you want to?
Whatever you want.
Well, so the one of the things I want to say is I know from talking to some Ukrainian business people that they see themselves as now. I mean, look, they're always going to be neighbors of Russia, but now they're looking to the West and they're saying we want to manufacture things for the United States and Europe. We don't, and they'll have to rebuild their manufacturing, their industrial capacity. But that's what a lot of them want to do. They don't want to be subordinate to anybody else. They're still fighting for their freedom, and they're like, this is how we can do it. Yeah. So go ahead.
I mean, Ukraine has a very robust industrial base.
Right.
I just saw yesterday, and it blew my mind, they actually supplying still aircraft components to Russia. So there is a worldwide ban, but Ukraine is manufacturing it because they under contract.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, you kind of go, you've got to be shitting me, right? But it's true.
Yeah.
So Ukraine has a very robust heavy industry basis, not so much light industry, meaning textiles or I don't know, home appliances.
Sure.
They don't have that, but they have mining and heavy industry, aviation. I mean, during the Soviet Union, most of the missiles, the ICBMs, were produced in Ukraine, aircraft engines. So they have both the infrastructure and the know-how. So yeah, I mean, I do believe once the war is over, and I thought it would be over by now, and it should be over by now, Ukraine is going to be an economic engine. And some European countries are going to get a run for their money. For example, Sweden, for example, France, which produce this kind of equipment at extremely high prices. I mean, most people are not even thinking about it. Germany, the Eurofighter, right?
Mm-hmm.
That travesty that the Europeans are trying to manufacture. And I just saw the Turks are trying to buy. Ukraine can produce that at half the price.
Wow.
With now the infrastructure will need to be updated because most of it is not computer-aided draft and design. But, there are a lot of engineers. It's a highly educated population. Honestly, it's back to your original question. Why don't we have better people? So everybody wants to make peace in the Middle East. One of the most difficult areas to make peace. Everybody in the United States tries to make peace in the Middle East. Russia, Ukraine is actually very easy to make peace. We're not trying at all. And you've got to ask yourself why.
Why? Yeah. 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 Why are we so desperate to get into Israel's business when they can handle Hamas, they can handle Hezbollah, they're glad to go handle Iran? I mean, they don't really, and what they don't need is more of our bad ideas. As you said, we've been trying to do this our
and
way
that's
for a
the
long
whole
time.
thing, and you don't need adult supervision, and you don't, I saw yesterday, and it's leaking, and every administration leaks, this one particularly so, that the United States is going to condition continued military aid to Israel, on accounting for displaced Palestinians. And you sort of go, well, wait a second. Israel is not present on the ground with people who can do civilian accounting. Right. It's conducting military operations. It's kind of like saying, well, we will not continue operations in Germany until there is full accounting for the displaced people from Dresden.
Right. Yeah.
And think about it. I actually looked it up the other day. On October 10, people were talking about a Marshall Plan for Gaza. And I got into a discussion with somebody and I'm saying, do you know when the Marshall Plan was developed? And it wasn't when the Normandy landings happened. It definitely did not happen right after Pearl Harbor.
Right. Yeah.
So seriously, it's
you gotta
just
wait. Yeah.
And Ukraine and Israel are not connected in any way, shape, or form, but in the mind of the American policy elite, for whatever reason, it appears like this is the easier place to offer advice and try to solve the problem.
Yeah.
The United States tried to solve the problem. We just celebrated the anniversary of the famous handshake on the South Lawn of the White House with President Clinton, Prime Minister Rabin, and Yasser Arafat, right? And where are we?
Yeah.
And how many wars were since then? You kind of go, how did it work in Afghanistan? How did it work in Iraq? Why do you think that you have this magic formula? And Israel is not going to be in Gaza for 20 years.
Mm-mm.
There is just no way on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, look, it's great to talk to you, and I don't want to take any more of your time. We've covered a lot of ground already, but I want to have you back and just continue these kind of conversations.
I like your podcast, and I like doing it for you. So anytime, please.
Yeah. Let me roll these credits, and I'll come right back, and we'll chat. Okay, let me roll these. Here we go. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much